Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of our Go Digital Western Cape webinar series. My name is Robert Davids, and I'll be your host for today's session. It's really good to see all of you that have been able to join us today here in Cape Town, where I'm broadcasting from. It's quite chilly and rainy, so I hope all of you have some better weather, or whether you are in this vicinity, that you're nice and warm and cozy and are going to enjoy the next hour with us today. Just before I continue, can I just ask all our guests to please turn off your video feeds and also to please turn off your mic. You'll find those functions on your toolbar, so we really appreciate that, just so that we don't have any unintended interruptions of our presenters today during the time that we're going through the program. Okay, so as I said, it's really good to have you with us. For our regulars, welcome back. For people joining us for the first time, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Go Digital Western Cape webinar team. Today we have quite an interesting topic, and I think something which affects all of us. As you saw on the invitation, we all are going to be looking at broadband options or broadband solutions for SMEs, because this is a very dynamic field, but sometimes one that's a little bit difficult to navigate. So today we are going to be taking you through these various solutions and various options, and our speaker, who I will say more about in a few minutes, is Tim Parle, who is the Chief Director here at our very own Department of Economic Development and Tourism. And on that note, I just want to mention a few things about the webinar series. For those of you who are not familiar with how this campaign works, the Go Digital Western Cape campaign is a campaign which was started by the Department of Economic Development and Tourism at the Western Cape Government as a direct response to COVID-19. And we have been running this program, or the campaign at least, since late April of this year. So I think we're about 5 months in. And the overall campaign encompasses these webinars. It also encompasses various other media that goes out and support to SMEs through tech volunteer programs and a range of other projects and initiatives which fall under this broad umbrella of the Go Digital Western Cape campaign. So this webinar series is one of those projects which fall under it. And yeah, I think today is our 18th webinar, so we've had quite a good run. And as I said, it's good to still have everybody with us as we're navigating this difficult time. Just before I continue, and before I hand over to Tim, I just want to ask you to indulge me for a minute or two. You can all see my screen, just to cover what we call some housekeeping rules to ensure that the webinar runs smoothly. Okay, then to come to today's topic. As you saw, we have the title, What the ISP? Broadband Options for Your Business. That's a shortened version of what you saw on the actual invitation. And you'll see there's a bit of the picture shows a Rubik's Cube. I think most of us will remember the infamous Rubik's Cubes, and with a computer and a cell phone behind it. And the reason for that is quite deliberate. I could perhaps talk from personal experience of use, but navigating the space of ISPs and navigating broadband tech, and then also deciding what it is that you need and what is best for your business can be a very daunting task. And it can become quite complex, and choosing between different packages and all these things and who's the best service provider can become complicated. And that's why it feels sometimes to me like a Rubik's Cube, because I remember trying to get all those colors on the same sides is quite an exercise that takes a lot of concentration and effort, and a bit of luck, I suppose. But I'm applying that to the broadband connectivity. I think now during the COVID-19 era, broadband connectivity has become an essential part of I think every business, and Some may not have it yet or be connected yet, but I think it's a critical part. One, just to operate in the current and digital age, but two, also there's a whole new move into online or e-commerce, online business. Also, how to communicate with your clients, your customers in an online environment, having enough capacity to operate on platforms like cloud and other systems. But then also not just with regard to your clients, with regard to work from home. Now, all of a sudden, broadband connectivity becomes important for your staff too, and your teams that you work in. So no matter which way you look at it, connectivity and broadband is a crucial part of business today and going forward. And we are going to try and demystify that for you a little bit as we go along. That said, I just recently saw a marketing campaign from one of the biggest or the leading ISPs in the country, and it actually said, and to quote them, it said, 3G is a treat, but 4G hits all the sweet spots with speeds up to 60 megabits per hour. So if that is 3G and 4G, then I don't know if 5G would be the cherry on the top, or how it fits into this metaphor of desserts and sweet things. But there's fiber, you have to think of LTE, there's wireless connectivity and routers and all these things. So as I said, it's a bit of a Rubik's Cube. We're going to have Tim, who we refer to as our in-house Broadband Jedi. He's going to help us put this Rubik's Cube or finish it correctly. And then hopefully by the end of the day, you as our members in the audience will have a much better idea of which solutions you should consider in terms of broadband connectivity and what is relevant and what's needed for your business, because you may have a very clear idea of what you want, but it may be more than you need, or it may not actually meet the needs that you do have with your business operations. So that's kind of sketching the picture and the context of what we're going to be discussing today. And I will be handing over to Tim Parle now. And just one last comment. Today, our good old friend called load shedding is back with us. So if there's an unintended interruption because of load shedding, please just be patient. We have some backup plans in place. But yeah, otherwise, everything should be fine. So Tim, if you're ready, then we can hand over to you and you can take us through the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I should now be on camera and I should be on audio. If you can give me a thumbs up for those two.
Yes, all good.
Okay,
can see you and on the presentation.
Put on the projection. So thank you very much for the introduction. Good afternoon to everybody. So we've got about half an hour or so. The main purpose today is just to help folks understand the complexities of broadband and the choices that are out there. There are literally a plethora of choices out there. About 3 weeks ago on the Go Digital series, we did have representation from 3 companies, and they gave us an overview of their view of broadband and their services. There was quite a few acronyms and quite a few words and quite a few new terms introduced there. So that's one of the reasons why we thought we'd have today, is to try and demystify some of those terms and break those down, and so that some of the advice that we received those weeks ago we could take here. So that's not an actual photo of me. It's not far off in some ways, but I'm sure that you'll agree that choosing a broadband service is full of spaghetti of acronyms and all sorts of different terms. So yeah, my job is to try and demystify those. I'm going to say it's not the smoothest path. I've been wrestling with how to do this. And I think we're going to have to go through the exercise, and because I'm not quite sure, haven't worked out exactly which is best. What do we introduce first? How do we walk with this thing before we can run? But take you through that and almost loop back, and hopefully by the end of the session today, you'll be comfortable with at least most of the terms that are on the screen at the moment. When we had our session those 3 weeks ago, I did put together one of these word search puzzles, and we had the names of the 3. It had all these words here and the names of the 3 operators that we had presenting. If anybody's interested, we'll pop that in the sidebar, and you can play along at home, as they say. And yeah, we can. If anybody is also interested, you can ask. We'll give you the solution. So let's start with some basics. I mean, some of this, I'm afraid, is very noddy. It's very basic, and you're here because of all of this. But let's just set this straight, because there are some terms that get mixed up. So the internet's been around with us for, what is it, 30 odd years now, Berners-Lee and all of that, the World Wide Web. But as we understand it, this giant global computer network, everything's interconnected. And why does it work? It works because we have the standard way of speaking to each other, these standard communications protocols. It's the type of stuff that originally you needed a PhD to understand, but hopefully now everybody can just make use of the service. Apologies if I check my phone from time to time, because I am operating on a load shedding and I don't have my usual facilities around me. So what are the main uses of the internet? I'm sure we all use these things: email, file transfer, e-commerce, increasingly rising in Africa, online banking, education, and collaboration. There's another reason that a lot of people use the internet, but the author of the article wasn't prepared to say that one here. But yeah, as I said, we all know and are familiar with what the internet is. Broadband, however, is a bit more of a tricky one. And I've worked in the broadband field for 15, 20 years or so, really since the topic has been conceptualized. And the definition has always been, pretty naff. And that there was two main characteristics about broadband. The main thing is it's always on. It's 24/7. It's there when you need it. And that it's faster than the traditional dial-up access. So I think some of you will remember this noise. I'm sure you've heard that before, and it's a while since we've heard it. But that was what narrowband was. And there we had fax machines. I'm sure it'll stop soon. We had fax machines, and we had our modems. The modem like this ran at a maximum speed of 56,000 bits per second, and we'll put that in context a little bit later. So remember that figure, 56,000 or 56 kilobits per second. Broadband will recognize these type of items around the house. There's just a well-known model. And whenever we're talking about speeds, we're measuring in these millions of bits per second, megabits per second. And there's a speedometer you can see there revving up at about 20 megabits per second. The location I'm at the moment has a 40 megabits per second connection. My own home has a 10 megabits per second connection. And in the office, we probably have 1,000 megabits per second connection. But at least now you've got an idea of what those units are. No, we don't need that again. So another concept is the question of wired versus wireless. Again, an easy one to understand. We've all used wireless. We're all quite familiar with having our cell phones. We're quite familiar with our DSTV dishes. We are aware that signals can get transmitted through the ether. But the mirror image of that, the opposite of that, is the concept of being wired. And wired isn't your state of mind after 6 coffees, but in this case is rather the terms is using wires or cables to transmit the medium. So for many folks, when you're in the office, you've got your laptop and you plug it into a docking station or your desktop computer, and there's that Ethernet cable that goes in. That is a wired network. The wireless network is the wireless LAN, or the Wi-Fi network in comparison. The wired network is also the home where I am at the moment. We have an optical fiber connection that's running along some poles up there, and it's coming down through a duct into the house. The communications to the house are over a wire or a cable. Now, analog phone lines are something that's been in our households. Most of us will have grown up with one of these. The younger amongst us might not recognize the device on the left. A lot of us would have had one of those Deezer or whatever they were, Protea or Luria phones in the hallway at home, one phone per household, those embarrassing phone calls to the boyfriend or girlfriend at the time. And then we evolved to the nice Dept cordless phones. The reason why these are important is they are still a common way of getting broadband services into homes, which we'll explore in a second. What's come along since the 1980s is the question of optical fiber. And this is really miraculous stuff. The technology has changed in some ways, that the fiber itself, but it's really what can be done with the fiber that is quite miraculous. And the basic premise of this, people will talk about optical fiber, they'll mention the word glass. It is basically some melted down glass, some silicon, in an extremely thin fiber cable, the thickness of a human hair, that is wrapped inside some various claddings. And the point is that you can put light at one end of it, and the light will bounce down the fiber cable and come out of the side. I mean, in the little picture there, that light is coming at a terrible angle, bad engineering, but the concept still stands there. And it's quite possible to have a piece of fiber cable that could run for a minute and you could see out the other side of it. It is quite possible to send a signal 100 kilometers before you have to do anything with it, with any regeneration or amplification. It's also the same technology that's used for our submarine cables that connect us in the Western Cape to the rest of the world. We have two cable landing systems, one in Melkbos-Strand and the other one in Azersfontein. And quite exciting stuff about some new cables there. And yeah, we are really very well connected to the rest of the world, thanks to some some commercial gains happened in the last 10 years or so. So another concept, while we're still working through the concept, is this question of being mobile. Again, we all got our cell phones, we get up, we move it, we walk around, we use it wherever we want to. No problem with that. The analogy here I've got is a little pup tent there. For that couple, they can put it on their back and they can set up and they just move around wherever. Maybe a better analogy would have been just you in a sleeping bag or even a homeless person, that they're mobile. They've got no fixed abode. They just keep moving around. So there's the opposite, fixed. So there's home sweet home, and there's a service, and you know that when you go to that location, there is a particular service available. So fixed, available in one known location, mobile, available pretty much anywhere. And the middle ground is this question of being nomadic. They're the example of a caravan. But in terms of telecoms terms, you have something like the Telkom fixed line lookalike service. So that service, you can use it anywhere in your house. You can use it in your neighborhood, but you can't take it to work with you or something like that. There are some services, some data services called fixed LTE, which ironically are nomadic, not fixed. But anyway, we'll go with the title. I hope I'm not losing you already with all the different acronyms. And I'm going to, as I said, we're going to have to loop through this a little bit. So let's look at some of these things. Network coverage, a concept that I think we pretty much all know, and I'm going to use the analogy of the water sprinkler that you put in your garden, and squish, 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 there we go, we're irrigating that lovely lawn there. And in this case, we have three of these irrigation devices, and in some areas, we're getting coverage from two of the sprays, but in other areas, this sort of green area, that grass is hardly going to get wet. And as you can imagine, closer to the irrigation spike, it's going to get quite wet and less wet the further you go out. And that's a fair analogy of how wireless and radio signals work, and that the network planners need to plan it so that if you're traveling from A to B to C here, that there is always this continuous or contiguous network coverage. The way we use that, though, practically is in coverage maps. I've got an example here of the MTN map. There are maps from all the leading operators. And I'm sure many of you have used these, but you'll be able to put an address and find out what service you've got there and what type of service. And as the number of services grows and gets more and more complicated, so these coverage maps need to be able to deal with that. The example of the MTN map there, you're able to turn on the layers for the different types of service. Have I got fiber at home? Have I got 3G or 4G or 5G at my home or my business location? So on to some of the technologies, and yeah, I hope you haven't had a big lunch, and this is the eyes glaze over session. So ADSL, we just need to deal with this one. This has been on the market in South Africa since 2002. It became the mainstay for small to medium enterprises and for homes, and there were about 1 million lines in service at peak 3 or 4 years ago. It is a DSL. D means it's a digital subscriber line. It runs over the conventional telephone line, and many of you will have seen these, they call it a splitter that you need. I'll show a diagram of why you need that in a second. But with the ADSL services, it replaced the modem. Remember, we heard that squeaking noise a few minutes ago, and we went from 56 kilobits, we went into the 2 and the 4 and the 10 megabits per second. So we sort of really started bringing broadband into the home and into the small business. There's a very competitive market for this. We'll see shortly how that works. But there has always been the argument that it's been expensive to run because you have to have a separate analog line into the house. The speeds are capped at 40 megabits per second in South Africa's application. And there's always this vulnerability to cable theft. And all those lovely baskets you see sometimes are weaved out of the connection that was coming to your home. There is an issue now in that Telkom, as the main provider, as practically the only provider of ADSL, are busy decommissioning the service. They are phasing it out. And essentially, if they're an area, for example, where I am right now, this house had ADSL, it now has fiber, and Telkom doesn't see the economic rationale to service both fiber and ADSL, so they will be reducing and removing the ADSL service. In terms of a typical setup, what you might have, what it might look like in your house. This is a British picture, so things look a little bit different. But you have a wall jack, and you come through to a splitter. Out of the splitter to your regular telephone. Doesn't always have to look like this. But from there is a cable into a device, an ADSL router, and then a connection through to your laptop or your desktop and other devices through Wi-Fi. So this device here is providing the dual role of connecting to the outside world with ADSL and connecting to your local computers. We're going to compare and contrast that against some other configurations in the next few slides. So fiber, as I mentioned, fiber has been introduced since the 1980s, but in terms of fiber coming into to the home, and excuse the typo in the heading, that should be FTTH for fiber to the home. So this has become popular in South Africa since about 2014 or 2015. The market has been quite disrupted, and a lot of those million ADSL lines have moved over to fiber, and there's also been a lot of growth of fiber. If I take the Western Cape and take Cape Town, or in Cape Town, most of the leafy suburbs are now connected with optical fiber. And then a lot of the other towns, Hermanus, Parle, Worcester, certainly Stellenbosch, and others, Saldanha, there are fiber networks either built or being built. One advantage is that this is newer technology, it's newer equipment, and so generally there's less maintenance issues and things work better and faster, not only because of the design, but because things are sort of new and shiny. There are some exciting developments. One of them is with the company Vumatel and their subsidiary Mitchell's Fibre, and they have rolled out fiber in 9 areas across the greater Mitchell's Plain area. They have managed to develop a lower cost model in terms of their operations and their design. And that's allowed them to offer packages which are really quite stunning. And just for some details, I think it's 399 Rand a month for a 20 megabits per second uncapped connection. Elsewhere, you're paying double that at least. And this is only available through a handful of service providers, and is a little bit like that Model 4T that was only available in black. You can only get 20 megabits per second uncapped, but that's a great service. But at $399 for a household, and yeah, a couple of households could share a service, or a couple of businesses even, that really is good value. And we expect to see more of that type of thing coming into the market. So in contrast to what we saw before, now we need to have 2 devices that are plugged into power. The fiber cable will come in, and there'll be a little box on the wall, and it'll connect in. And there's something called an optical networking terminal that needs its own power. That'll then get connected into a very similar router to what we saw before. In fact, in some cases, you can even reuse the old one, and again, distributes the service to the other laptops and devices and printers and so on using Wi-Fi or the LAN service. I mentioned in my typo earlier about FTTH and FTTB. Fiber to the business is a very similar concept, and is sort of the granddaddy of fiber to the home. And in many cases, we've had fiber to the business ahead of fiber to the home in South Africa. Why? Because companies needed the service and were prepared to pay for it. Generally, it's a faster service, but generally, it's also a more expensive service. You're paying a premium because of the cost and the technology that's used. So across South Africa, most of the main metro areas now, the commercial industrial areas, those have got fiber to the business services available, possibly from multiple service providers. And something we're going to explain later is this concept of a service level agreement. With fiber to the business, you pay more, but you get some sort of guarantee that the service will be available to you. Technologies used are very similar, although different operators will prefer one over the other. And arguably, the reliability of a business connection is going to be better for you because you pay a premium and you should get a better response for that. So if a fiber breaks, maybe whatever you've negotiated, you'll get a repair in 4 hours or 8 hours rather than 24 hours or 48 hours. I have previously been the managing director of a telecom operator that provided FTTH and FTTB services, and the general public do see very little difference between these services and believe that they are paying, at $6.99 a month, they are paying sufficient to demand a service and expect a service like you get on the right-hand side there. It's a very tricky thing, and it's a hard thing to balance the economics. So in terms of excuse me while I just double check my phone and check I'm not talking into the ether. No, all good. We can edit that out later. So in terms of the evolution of services, I mentioned the dial-up, and we had those noises, and ADSL has sort of come and gone, and fiber to the home is really taking off. Fiber to the business, we expect to carry on, and really, it equips us through to the next few decades. We're going to next deal with something called fixed wireless, and as you can see from the crosses, there have been some victims along the way. There have been some technologies like WiMAX, and there have been some operators. Centec had a service in the early 2000s. iBurst ran a very successful service for some years under the iBurst brand, but those services are no longer with us. But there are now services from wireless internet service providers. Just watch out, we'll take you through that. And the other ones you're going to be looking out for are all the mobile services. We've heard of 2G and 3G and 4G, and there's a lot of press at the moment about 5G. So that's the sort of introduction to the next section. So 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G. The first sort of working title for this webinar was What the G? But yeah, so we moved to What the ISP. You will recall your first phone, that Nokia 3310, which is probably still sitting in your drawer. It's probably still sitting on 3 out of 5 battery bars, because those things never die. But with that, you could make phone calls. You could later send SMSs and do some very, very basic data stuff, even if you didn't know about it. But you could play snakes. Then along came 3G phones. First 3G was introduced in South Africa. That date, I think, is a little ambitious, was 2004 were the first 3G services in South Africa. And we started getting a handful of megabits per second of service where you could get that service. Around 2010 or so, I think, I must get my facts straight, but it was when we started getting the early iPhones coming in as well. 4G, and you may remember some of the fun commercials with Trevor Noah, and there was a race between the operators to get 4G, or 4G, as Cell C managed to brand it. As you can see, it introduced more by actually providing video services, and now you can see the progression of video speeds. And now in 2020, we're in the era of 5G. The first networks have rolled out. I think Vodacom, MTN, and Rain so far have rolled out. I think there is a connection with Liquid Telecom from Vodacom. But we are going to see more of this, and it does things bigger, wider, faster, all of those things. And if you imagine if you take in your mind's eye, if you take the train station in central Cape Town, and you imagine the flow of people through there on a busy workday morning. A few years ago, 1 in 1,000 people had a cell phone, then 1 in 100, then 1 in 10, and now everybody's got a cell phone. And not only got a cell phone, but they've got a smartphone. So the technology needs to move to accommodate that rise in service and rise in people. And that's really what 5G does. It allows massive more people and machines and devices to use the system simultaneously. Everything's quicker, faster, more instant, this whole instant gratification story. And down the bottom, just as illustration, we've got the sort of latest iPhone there to show the evolution of the species. Again, in terms of evolution of the species, when mobile devices first came out, the first road warriors were using a data card. It's slotted into the side of your laptop. And then came this thumb drive, or this data dongle about the size of your finger. And then quite a few folks still use the MiFi router, the personal router. The advantage of that is that you can share it amongst several people. It has its own battery backup. And the larger device, it's a little pale there, but as an example of a device that's being used for 4G and 5G, and you can use to share in a small office. The concept of embedded is meaning that we're getting the same service, but it's actually directly there on your cell phone, be that a 4G or a 5G service. And the reason why I show that is just, if you remember, sorry, back to this picture, is how we evolved from 3G data cards to dongles to embedded devices. So another type of wireless service is that of WISPs, or the wireless internet service providers. And here they provide an internet service, but predominantly they're using a wireless service. It has become quite a popular thing in South Africa. The technology has improved, the business has improved, the market has improved, and yeah, people are able to offer an extremely credible service, much like DSL, but delivered where you can't get a copper wire to your home, or those wires are always being stolen. Just some of the graphics. This is an installation happening. I can't tell exactly where that is. There's an organization that manages a lot of the WISPs called WAPA, and this is one of their photos. And then sort of a view, you might see some equipment on top of a building. You might see at a larger business, you might see some of these devices, the sort of figure 8 device. This is a high capacity WISP service. Although, but back to other areas, homes and small businesses, you might see a dish that looks, something like this on a pole. There's all sorts of different shapes and sizes of these things. So the WISP. Oh, I'm missing a picture. I've probably got my order wrong. I'll have to come back to that. Sorry, there's my WISP layout. Sorry, the order went wrong. It was very much like that DSL picture and the fiber picture we saw earlier. Actually, like the fiber picture. We have the computer that's connected to the router, the same type of router, but instead of that optical networking terminal, we have what's called a power supply or indoor unit. And the important part is that there's a cable runs outside, and on the outside, you have a small dish. This particular one is about the size of a dinner plate. You get others that are just about the size of your hand. There are others, again, small, sort of large plate, like a mini scottle sort of size. That needs to be mounted on the outside of the building, and it needs to have clear line of sight to wherever the equipment is from the wireless internet service provider. The satellite broadband is the third type of wireless connection here. I think we're all familiar with what a satellite is, but in the case of communication satellites, these are same devices that are providing our DSTV signal, or very similar devices. They're sitting out 38,000 kilometers off an orbit 38,000 kilometers away. And as the Earth rotates, the satellite rotates with it. It stays in exactly the same place. That's called geostationary. And with that, you can point the dish to it and get the service. So because it's a satellite service, it's pretty much ubiquitous. The footprint in green there is one of the services called YarClick. And it covers, as you can see, from most of South Africa and Lesotho and a bit of Swaziland, a bit of Mozambique. It starts to run out of steam when we get into the Karoo in the Northern Cape. But that was a business decision that they made in terms of their target market. The devices are a bit bigger than a DSTV dish. They tend to point up at a sharper angle, a bit more sophisticated looking equipment on the outside. But again, it looks very much like that wireless installation that we saw. I'll show you some pictures just now where we'll compare all of the costs and the services. But it's a very similar sort of thing. And the only real concern is that in some situations, what's called latency. You remember the days of talking on a phone to Europe, and you'd be a delay and a beep at the other end. It's a bit like that, although technology has moved on and this can be addressed. And if you are working in the middle of the platteland and have one of these services and it gets struck by a truck or lightning or something, to get a repair person out there is going to be a considerable amount of time. Let's just go on to the broadband speeds, quick check of time. And so the spread of speeds is shown on this graph, with the most popular sort of shown in yellow. Over time, ADSL users have moved from 8 megabits per second to 10 to 20 as being the sweet spot. Fiber to the home, most folks will buy a 20 megabits per second service. We'll explain why shortly. And in contrast, the business folks will tend to choose more. LTE doesn't really have a fixed speed. It all depends on who else is using it and where you are in network conditions, as does 5G, the two mobile services. So that's one of the reasons why I sort of faded it out there. The WISP service is quite similar to ADSL and fiber to the home, and satellite again tends to be similar, but maybe a little bit cheaper. A little bit slower, just largely because of the costs involved. The faster you go, the more you have to pay. It's a general rule, but in the satellite world, that's a particularly harsh rule. In terms of the bits that glue networks together, the backbone, they use exactly the same sort of stuff, but you can see that they're using a much, much higher broadband speed. So here's the graph that I promised you of comparing things. So ADSL we've mentioned is a fixed technology. How does it get into your home or your business? Through a copper cable. It's declining in terms of market. It may be extinct in a few years' time, up to 40 megabits per second. We've had 1 million users across South Africa. We can't get a service level agreement. And the cost is a little bit higher than some of the other services. I'll give a caveat to that. It used to be because you had to pay for the telephone line as well. Regardless of whether you had a phone connected and made phone calls, you had to pay for the phone line and the DSL and the bandwidth components. Telkom are now actually running some extremely good specials, and they have been running them through lockdown. And basically, they are trying to extract the last bit of value out of the ADSL service, the classic cash cow. And there are uncapped services available, I think, from as little as 199 Rand a month. And, it's what's the old adage, get it while you can. So maybe it's a bit punitive to have the $2 signs there. Fibre to the home, fibre to the business, but they're both fixed over a fibre cable, both rising fast. Maximum speeds, most people, most operators cut out at 200 megabits per second for the home. The odd person, they will provide 1,000 megabits per second, but that's largely a question of vanity. The important difference, as we mentioned here, is this question of the service level agreement, and then there's a cost premium. Satellite rising slowly, available everywhere, expensive. Mobile data rising very fast. Everybody's got a mobile data service. And what's the speed? It's actually not really relevant. You don't really measure mobile data and speed. And we can get it, it's nearly ubiquitous in the country. 3G and 4G are close to 100% available across the country. 5G we're starting to see that. But the cost is relatively high. And then WISPs are very similar to ADSL, a little bit faster, metro and rural. And I said partial in terms of the SLA because some organizations will offer you an SLA, which I'm going to explain still. So who's who in the zoo here? We've got a very simple diagram. We've mentioned internet service providers. I'll give some examples. And some internet service providers actually are a network provider as well. Others are they just do the job of providing internet service over a third-party network provider. A wireless service provider, a wireless internet service provider, is generally also vertically integrated and does both of these, and they all provide services across these different segments. So if I give the example, at my house, I have a telecom service, and so telecom is my internet service provider. They use OpenServe. It happens to be their in-house division, and that provides a service to my house in Cape Town. However, my neighbor, they have a service from AfriHost, also using OpenServe. So you see a common network provider, a different internet service provider. My neighbor on the other side of the road could be using a wireless service. And I've taken the example of Sonic Wireless. And there they're using their own system. And we're all getting a very similar service, but through a very different business model. What's important here is that the relationship here, my relationship is with Telkom. My neighbor's relationship is with AfriHost. If he or she has an issue, they contact AfriHost. AfriHost try to resolve it. If they can't resolve it, then they ask OpenServe to resolve it, and then hopefully it gets fixed and it gets fixed quickly. And AfriHost takes the billing, does the customer care, and all of that. So that's the way that the market is sort of split up. In terms of the size, there are over 1,500 registered internet service providers in South Africa, and there are a similar number of network providers, and there's a subset of those are the wireless internet service providers. The Internet Service Providers Association has close on 200 members, and the Wireless Association has also close on 200 members. There is some overlap in these areas. The definitions are a little tricky, but you can see that if you were to list the Internet Service Providers, you can see why you might run out of steam a long way before you get to the top of this list. My own figures, there's about 50,000 business subscribers. There's about 1.2 million home subscribers and SMMEs together. These are the sort of fiber and ADSL connections and the WAPA members. And the consumers, that's you and me with our cell phones, and also talking to machines. There's about 60 million of those in South Africa. So there's actually more cell phones and more SIM cards in use than there are people. That's because some of us have multiple devices, and then also we have devices, we have SIM cards and traffic lights and air conditioning systems and these type of things. So I've not mentioned Wi-Fi. So everybody wants to know, all they want is Wi-Fi. That's just the answer. Just give me Wi-Fi. What is Wi-Fi? It's actually a trademark thing. It's the facility that allows you to connect your various devices to the internet, and you work within one particular area. Another definition here, and it's mentioning laptops, smartphones, tablets, and so on. And the way we sort of recognize Wi-Fi is we spoke about the MiFi routers, these down the bottom left. We will have seen Wi-Fi devices in our home that have got 2 little aerials sticking out. And now there's even ones with 4 aerials and more. This is really just between these two is a progression of Wi-Fi technology, different protocols, allows it to work, again, better, faster, lower latency in your home. But how does Wi-Fi work? You can't just say, I want Wi-Fi. Well, you can say that. A lot of people do. I've been on the receiving end of that question a lot. But how do you make it? How does it actually work? Excuse me. So the way it works is if I start on the right-hand side here, you have all the devices you want to connect to Wi-Fi. You need a device. That device needs a broadband connection through an internet service provider, through their own broadband connection to the internet. But this router, whatever this device is, and it might be one of these devices down the bottom, it always has a dual function. It has the function of providing the Wi-Fi service over to the right here and communicating with the network. So if I go back to this device here, this device communicates on the 4G or the LTE network that way, and Wi-Fi to the devices. This device here might connect to a fibre modem, or be the fibre modem, connect to that ONT device and provide the Wi-Fi. So remember that you need a device here. You've got to have a connection to the outside world. Within your home, within your business, Wi-Fi speeds are up to about 600 megabits per second these days. It's possible to have repeaters and other things to make sure that you've got coverage all over your house and your business. But the speed on the network side is the limiting factor. So in my house, as I mentioned, I have a 10 megabits per second broadband connection here, and I've got a fancy new Wi-Fi that does 600 megabits per second, which is fine. The various devices can talk to each other quickly, but to talk to the outside world, it is a bit limited. But that works fine for me in my household. So the question is, what capacity do I need? And in this particular case, capacity is a measure of the amount of data provided, and we measure that in units of bytes or multiples thereof. So I've got up at the top here, I have 1,000 bytes is a kilobyte. Typo. 1,000 kilobytes is a megabyte. 1,000 megabytes is a gigabyte, terabyte, petabyte, and so it goes on. And it's also, I like the way that in our previous session, Rich Hen gave the example of a 5-liter bottle of water versus, I think he had another 300 ml bottle of Aquele or whatever it was, water. Saying at different times, you need different things. So you're prepared to pay different prices. So if you're out and about and you're very thirsty, it's a hot day in your car, you are prepared to buy a liter bottle of water for 10 bucks, right? At 10 Rand a liter. However, for your home, you want to have some storage, and because of water load shedding, so you want to put a tank in place, let's say a 500-liter tank here, and you expect to fill that for, let's say, R1 a liter. And then, by the same measure, you want to store your rainwater. You want to store that, and arguably you want to store that for free. I'm not sure where my analogy is going, but I think you get the idea that there's different capacities for different purposes. So again, on the question of how much you need, it depends what you're doing with the system, and also then how many people are doing it. Table that I found here that sort of showed a measurement in megabytes and gigabytes. And yeah, you can see that if I want to cruise Facebook and not really look at the videos, I think that's a bit old, cruise Facebook for an hour, I'm going to use 20 megabytes. If I'm going to watch a movie in non-HD, it's going to be about a gigabyte. Yeah, so all of these things add up, and what your service provider doing is they are counting each byte that you're using and they're adding it to your tally. So you might have bought a certain amount and they're decrementing, taking off a little bit as you use it, or alternatively, some of them, if it's postpaid, they'll be calculating it up, and at the end of the month they'll give you the bill for what you use. Mostly it's upfront. You have an allowance and you work your way down that allowance. So how fast does it need to be? Well, again, there's all sorts of considerations here. What are you doing with it? We saw that list of various things, which is sort of pretty much repeated on the left-hand side there. But how many people are using your broadband connection? Now, this is in your business. You may have a number of desktops and laptops and smartphones that are there. Are there CCTV cameras that you're wanting to monitor off-site? And then how many people are working there? You may have a staff of 20, but 10 of those are in the office at any given time, and the other 10 are out on the road. Do you need to cater for guests? These are all things that you need to factor in. And then there's also the question of, well, is this available? Do you need it just during office hours, or the after hours, or the peak times, that sort of thing? And it's going to sound strange, but one of the analogies this is on the right there, the bathrooms. How many bathrooms do you have in your home or in your business? Have you got enough? If you've suddenly got a lot more workers and your staff has doubled and you've still only got one bathroom, there's going to be a problem. And you're going to realize you need either a bigger premises or you need to add on some bathrooms or make another plan. And it's the same sort of way with your broadband speed. You need to match the facilities against the demand. And so the question, it might seem that I'm not answering a question, but one of the starting places is have a look at the most common applications and have a consideration where on that list you think you find yourselves. Are you a typical business? Have you got a lot of knowledge workers? People are really using a lot of cloud computing, working that computer hard. Are the computers sitting there idle most of the day because the staff are out doing field calls? So that would put you at the lower end of the scale. It just helps gives you an indication. Here's another view. I actually found this to be a little rich. This was, I think, a British or even an American view. And they're saying, so a small business with a couple of people, 5 megabits per second, I get that. Suddenly we're jumping up to 25, 75, 150. And the problem here is this doesn't match the graduations available in the market. But nevertheless, you see the sort of idea that you have. And as you start adding more cloud computing, video conferencing, and so on, you start to get up to higher ends. Overall, I would say that that a lot of businesses, 100 megabits per second is a good speed for a lot of businesses. So I'm coming to the end of my little diatribe here. But there were some terms that I wanted to go through, and we can leave these for future reading. And these are just terms that you might see on your contract. They might appear on your bill. You might get charged a non-recurring cost, just a once-off fee. You might get a monthly recurring cost. There might be a variable charge. Any contract has its term. And this is the important one that we mentioned earlier, this SLA. People like to throw this word SLA in there. And this is where the internet service provider will, and I use the word guarantee, and I'm doing the finger quotes thing there, guarantee their service through an SLA. Here they will say, for example, our service will be available for 99.5% of the time. Now that sounds great. I want my heart to be available 100% of the time, not 99.5% of the time. And if you really rely on it, those 0.5% might be a problem for you. And also there's a question of what will they give you if they don't meet the service that they promise you. What are they going to do? Give you a little bit of money back, or promise you an extra month at the end of your contract free? You know, it's all a matter of business, and you need to see what's in your SLA. Some terms that are, as well, you will see, and also included in your domestic as well as your business accounts, an acceptable user policy. Basically, it's the do's and the do nots of what you use the system for. Yeah, they don't want you doing bad stuff on their network. The fair usage policy. I read something about some guy in lockdown who downloaded something like 76 terabytes worth of data on a fiber connection. Why? But the point is that when somebody's using that, it's like them using one of the bathrooms, to use the other example, and they're using it 24/7, so it doesn't give anybody else the opportunity. So that's where a fair user policy comes in. A cap is that agreed amount of bandwidth that you say that you're going to use in a month. And the question is, what happens when you get to that cap, or you get to the bottom of it when you run out? Some service providers will give you a hard cap, and that says, right, you've reached the limit, boom, they cut the service off there and then, and until you pay some extra to the end of the month, you're out of luck. Others will do a soft cap, which will throttle, which will limit your service down to maybe a quarter of your speed or a fifth of your speed until the end of the month. And then uncapped, we've seen that there's no cap, but there's always like a fingers crossed with that. There is an FUP or an AUP. My 10 megabits per second connection at home, I can use 300 gigs in a month. When I get to that point, I get soft cap down a level. And if I get to something like 400, they'll cut me off. But, you know, that's fair enough. You get what you pay for. Last few things, if you're looking for services, there are some sites to help you out there. Fiber Tiger specializes in fiber to the home connections. The Hippo, you'll all know the Hippo, a well-known brand in South Africa. They are now doing internet deals as well. Pindrop is mainly for business services, higher end business services. And again, they aggregate from some of the major operators, but they'll be able to tell you about some very impressive fiber deals that are available. They'll also be able to, they know which fiber operators work in their area, and also which wireless operators work in the area and who are contracted in with them. And then, as I mentioned, the WAPA, the Wireless Association, Wireless Application Providers Association, they have a, I'm looking for coverage facility, and that's particularly useful for rural areas. So coming right to the end here, how do you choose your broadband service? Engineers, we talk about this thing called the right-hand orthogonal triplet. Can I get it? That's the location. Who's got my coverage? What sort of speed and capacity I need? But the principal one is, how much am I prepared to pay? For a business, you're going to use also at the same time, you need to consider how good is the service you're getting, what service level, because it's going to be critical to your business, and that reliability, and that, how much of the day, how much of the month is that service available to you. So how can you make any service more reliable? There's the old question of belts and braces. And with that, you might want to consider dual medium, fiber and wireless, for example. Maybe you want to have 2 ISPs, but just remember that your one service may cost more than the other. So you can have some routers that allow you to add a mobile service, or you want to fail over to satellite. but you want something that works. It's the equivalent of load shedding and having a generator available. Speaking of load shedding, that's the other thing you need. You need the belts, the buckle, the braces, whatever it's called, and the piece of string to keep your pants up. You need a UPS. I'm going to skip this just to say that the Western Cape, we have a free public Wi-Fi. We have over 800 sites across the Western Cape. The city of Cape Town has 950 odd sites, and there are other service providers out there. So there are free broadband services available out there. And here's my final thoughts. Not all broadband services are equal. So if you're getting a 10 megabits per second service from one, there are ways that they can do it. And I won't explain the technical reasons why, but one that's cheaper than what looks like a similar service, there's a reason why it's cheaper, because not all the ISPs are equal. They've got different overheads, but they will give you different types of services. You get what you pay for. Remember, when a service works for you, you'll remember that service. When the service is bad, you'll remember that one even longer. There are these different technologies out there. We've seen some of them have fallen by the wayside. There are going to be some that we look back in a few years' time and we won't see anymore. And my sort of final word of advice is just ask around, speak to your neighbors, speak to other businesses in your area, see what works for them, and that should help you find your best service. Robert, I think that's it from me, apart from pointing you to the article, which I'm hoping somebody will drop in the sidebar, that we wrote a week or two ago that sort of covers some of the stuff that I've spoken about today. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much. I'll just share my little screen on this side again. There we go. So Tim, thank you very much. I think that was really excellent. I think using the metaphor of the Rubik's Cube, I definitely think we've got a few more sides of the Rubik's Cube sorted today, because a lot of the information that you shared was new to me completely, and I kind of work in the sector, so that says a lot. But I mean, for instance, some things about the 1,500 ISPs, 1,500 network providers, that just blew my mind. So in terms of the scale of what's out there, just some data like that. But then also it really got me thinking. And perhaps just before I pose one or two questions to you, and for the audience also, I mean, when we're looking at broadband connectivity, I think, Tim, what you have shared is really the scope and the potential of what the various kinds of services and systems can offer business. And currently, in the time that we're in, when we're looking at having business resilience, and we're looking at how we can change business models, or the word that's being bandied around nowadays, how you can pivot your business, is going to become the new kind of buzzword, I suppose. Then when you look at connectivity, I think you should also start looking at not necessarily how does it allow you to do what you currently do, but how it can open up opportunities for new business models and new ways of connecting with your market and doing business. I mean, and as an example, in the tourism industry, and possibly the real estate industry. I know in real estate, because of COVID-19 protocols and social distancing, it's becoming almost essential to have virtual tours of properties that are up for sale or up for rent. And so content creation, video and uploading video and allowing it to stream and stuff, that requires a certain speed of broadband and a certain capability of your system, because that's how clients are going to expect to communicate with you. In the tourism sector, virtual tours to keep your brand strong, to encourage people to come to your physical premises once they are able to and allowed to, also then requires a different kind of speed and capabilities of your broadband connectivity. So I think when you look at this, it's important to think about new business opportunities that you could use it to build on and as I said, pivot your business. And then Tim, maybe just one or two, because I am conscious of our time, one or two questions to you. Firstly, I'm glad you touched on it now towards the end, because one of the most common questions around broadband options for personal use or for business use is the cost. So it's so expensive, or why do we need to pay so much, etc. But I do think what you have illustrated is that it also depends on exactly what your needs are, and also we have to do a bit of homework, really determine what it is that you need, because there will be some costs. But that said, do you anticipate that the costs will come down significantly going forward? I mean, what do you anticipate the trends to be? And linked to that, you may have covered it, or maybe there isn't a straight answer, but um, do you have to lock yourself, generally speaking, into long-term contracts, or are there kind of month-to-month options that businesses can use to test certain things before they lock themselves into a 2-year contract? Perhaps you have some views on that. And then one which is more of an everyday kind of operational matter in terms of maybe your perception. There's this kind of almost assumption by customers or clients or the public that if you go to business premises nowadays, you need Wi-Fi access. Is that really something that adds value to a business? Because when you, as you said, sometimes you can choose to have 2 ISPs, but is that kind of expectation by the public for free access to Wi-Fi on business premises? Do you think that something is just kind of popular rhetoric, or is it something that's worth considering when you make your decisions? So maybe if we could round up with those 2 questions, Tim, and then I'll finish off for the day. Okay.
Thank you very much. So first of all, just in terms of the services, you're absolutely right. We're seeing all these new things, these virtual tours and all sorts. There are some great articles in our Go Digital series which explain new business models. So I'm not going to go through those there. I'm sure you've already pointed everybody to those resources. Trends and costs. I think that a lot of the fixed services, we're going to see, no pun intended, a fixed price. Bear in mind that prices have actually been counter-inflationary for the last good many years. You've been able to get a $7.99 service and stick with it for 4 or 5 years, even with against inflation. And that's due to the higher level of competition in the market. That's for a fixed service. We are seeing some fantastic ADSL deals at the moment. I say we're moving your standard Boston consulting thing. It's a real cash cow. Milk the last bit of the life out of that service while it's there, and also get customers on the network. In terms of mobile data, prices have come down. There's been a lot of pressure from things like the Competition Commission, and Vodacom MTN certainly reacted to that. Cell C and Telkom Mobile took a slightly different stance, and as did Rain. Maybe there'll be some more pressure, and there's always deals. They're fantastic commercial operators. They know how to do a good deal. Contracts are generally 24 months. You will get 12-month contracts. You will get 36-month contracts. What you'll generally find is there's a large one-off fee that the fibre network operators charge internet service providers, and that needs to be recovered and amortized. Your fibre to the home, you're seeing people are still offering free installation, and I've seen the actual cost. It costs 3,000 or 4,000 rand to connect up each home or business, and those costs have to be amortized somewhere. Wi-Fi in business, yes, it is a common thing. People expect it. Things do come and change. I think as mobile data comes down, people will actually say, well, actually, I prefer to use my personal data. Why? Because it's my relationship with my service provider. I'm not putting myself at any risk by connecting to any third-party network, because there are cybersecurity risks. Yeah, those are 4 very quick answers.
Thank you, Tim. Tim, can I take that as your last comments, or would you want to leave us with a lasting thought? Okay, I think you've done for the day, Tim. But that was really, as I said, jam-packed. A lot of key takeaways, and I see from the comments in our chat group also. I think the audience found some great value in that, Tim. So thank you very much for helping us navigate and finish the Rubik's Cube on broadband options for the day. I think that was really great, especially for me too, as I said in the beginning. So to our audience, we've come to the end of today's session. We've run slightly, just a few minutes over time, but I'm sure you understand, because that was a lot of info to share. So I just want to say thank you very much to you for joining us today. We at the Digital Economy Unit here at the department, we're very happy that you are still joining us for these webinars. And today our presenter is from our department, but Tim, still, thank you on behalf of the unit and the team. Thank you for your preparations and for sharing some really great information with us today. And then you'll see in the sidebar there were a few resources we put up there. So in the audience, please have a look at that. And then once I sign off, I will share a few slides on some additional resources and information linked to the Go Digital Western Cape campaign. But one last word from me, is that in September, we'll be focusing on some very, very interesting topics and very relevant now, looking at mobile money and e-wallets, because in this time that we are living in now, cashless transactions are going to become more and more readily used. And we're also going to focus again on mobile technology solutions specifically for your business. So please keep an eye on your inbox for some new invitations coming out and sharing that with your networks. But for now, from our side at the unit, thank you very much again to the audience. Tim, thanks very much for your presentation today. And then we will see you next time, and hope that you'll join us again. So be safe and take care, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Goodbye.